She scrubbed his floors on her knees for 11 weeks. And he had no idea she could burn his entire kingdom to the ground. Everyone in this pack believed she was no one. Maid. A ghost. A girl with empty eyes and cold hands and nothing worth noticing. They were so wrong. Because 7 years ago, this same pack surrounded her family's home in the middle of the night, set it on fire, and stood in the tree laughing while everything she loved turned to ash. They thought she died in that fire. She did not die. She absorbed it. Every flame. Every burning beam. Every degree of heat they threw at a 12-year-old girl who had done nothing wrong. She took it all into her body. And she became something they do not have a name for. Something ancient. Something that does not break when you burn it. Something that walks back through the front gate 7 years later wearing a maid's uniform and starts memorizing every corridor, every weakness, every exit in the house of the man who gave the order. And she waited. She waited through cold floors and freezing corridors and 11 weeks of invisible, patient, devastating silence. She waited until the night a dying boy was carried into the great hall with silver burning through his blood. And that was the night the Alpha King finally looked at his maid. Really looked. And saw something in her eyes that made the most powerful wolf in the territory go completely, utterly still. 'Cause it was not fear. It was never fear. Stay with me. Because what happens at that dinner table is the moment this entire story detonates. Aldrich Crane traveled across the mountain with a case specifically designed to contain her. He had been building it for 2 years. He walked into Ironmoor Keep with 3 wolves, a silver suppression device, and the absolute confidence of a man who has never encountered something he could not put in a box. She emptied that case with her bare hand, in front of everyone, and then she sat down in the chair that no one in the pack was allowed to speak about. And she did not ask for permission. She was never asking for permission. She was deciding. The twist at that dinner table will change the way you see every scene that came before it. The thing she was really planning. The reason she healed the boy instead of letting him die. The name she found in week 6 in the East Archive that told her exactly who stood in that tree. And what she chose to do with it. Do not skip this. I am not saying that for the algorithm. I am saying it because the final thing she does in that great hall is not what you are expecting. It is not revenge. It is not fire. It is something so much harder and so much more powerful than either that the wolves who were in that room spent the rest of their lives trying to describe it to people who were not there. And none of them ever found the right words. Because this is the story of a girl who was given ash and built a throne from it. And you have never heard anything like it. The fire had smelled like pine resin and betrayal. I remembered it the way you remember a nightmare. Not in sequence, but in sensations. The roar of orange flame eating through cedar walls. The acrid bite of smoke filling my lungs until I could not scream. The sound of laughter from the tree. Their laughter. And now, 7 years later, I was on my knees in their great hall, scrubbing ash from a stone floor. Ash that was not so different from what remained of everything I had ever loved. My name was Seraphine Voss. And I had come back to the Ironmoor Pack wearing a maid's uniform like armor. The hall of Ironmoor Keep reeked of dominance. Pine sap and iron ore and the heavy musk of 200 wolves living in close, brutal hierarchy. Every stone in the floor had been worn smooth by the boots of alphas who believed themselves gods. I pressed my bare knees against the cold and let it steady me. Freezing mud still clung to the hem of my dress from the crossing through the forest at dawn. I did not flinch. I did not look up. That was the first rule of surviving inside an enemy's walls. Make yourself invisible until you were ready to be seen. New girl. The voice came from above me like a stone dropped from height. I felt the vibration of heavy boots on the floor before I heard them. A deep, rhythmic knock that traveled through the cold stone and into my palms. Kept scrubbing. I said, "New girl." I looked up slowly, the way someone looks up who has learned that speed reads as defiance. The Alpha King of Ironmoor stood 6 feet above my eye level. Caspian Dre. The boy who had grown into the monster. He was built like something carved from the mountain itself. Broad through the chest, dark-haired, with pale gray eyes the color of sky before a storm decides what it wants to become. He was 25 now. He had been 18 the night his pack had surrounded my family's home. He wore his authority like a second skin, and it did not sit uncomfortably on him. That was the worst part. He did not look like someone who lost sleep. "You are the new maid," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, Alpha," I said. My voice was flat, controlled, like water with no current visible on the surface. He studied me with those storm-gray eyes, and something flickered behind them. Not recognition, not yet, just the idle curiosity of a predator who notices a creature that is too still to be harmless. "What is your name?" "Sarah," I said. Not Seraphine. Seraphine Voss was a dead girl. Sarah was the name of no one in particular. He crouched down in front of me without warning, and the sudden drop in his height brought his face level with mine. The smell of him hit me like a physical force. Wood smoke and cedar and something electric, something that the wolf inside me recognized before my mind could silence it. My wolf went very, very quiet. Not from fear. From fury so deep it had no temperature left. "You are not afraid of me," he said. Came out wondering almost. Like he had found something unexpected in a familiar room. "I am afraid, Alpha," I said. He tilted his head. "No," he said softly. "You are not." The silence between us lasted exactly 4 seconds. I counted them the way I had learned to count everything in the years since the fire. Measuring distance, measuring exits, measuring the exact moment a situation shifts from manageable to catastrophic. Then he stood, and the moment passed like weather. "See that the east corridor is finished before nightfall," he said. And he walked away. I went back to scrubbing. My hands were steady. My hands were always steady. That was the second thing the fire had given me, after the scars along my left shoulder blade that no one here had seen yet. The fire had burned away everything soft in me. What remained was something the Ironmoor Pack did not have a word for yet. They would. The weeks passed in cold water and stone dust, and the particular exhaustion of a woman performing smallness. I learned the keep the way a general learns a battlefield. I learned which floorboards creaked outside the war room. I learned that the Beta Rho drank himself unconscious every 3rd night, and that the keep's eastern armory was left unlocked when he did. I learned that Caspian Dre did not sleep past 4 in the morning. That he ran the perimeter of his territory alone before dawn. That he carried guilt the way some men carry muscle, so long he did not notice the weight of it anymore. I had not come to forgive him. I want to be clear about that. I had come because 7 years ago, when the Ironmoor wolves had surrounded my family's home and set it alight, there had been one survivor. Me. And what I had survived as was not something the pack hierarchy had prepared for. Because my family had not been ordinary wolves. We had been Ashen. The last bloodline in 7 generations to carry the old power. The ability to absorb flame, to metabolize destruction, to convert every wound and every burning into raw, terrible strength. The fire that killed my family had not killed me. Had fed me. And for 7 years I had been learning what that meant. The night everything changed smelled like blood and ozone. One of the pack's younger wolves had come in from the forest with a silver-laced wound across his throat. The work of hunters, Rose said, pushing through the hall doors with a boy hanging limp between 2 wolves. Silver did not kill immediately. Crept. It turned the blood cold and slow. It shut the healing down. It left a wolf shaking and burning from the inside while the body forgot how to knit itself back together. I was in the hall. I was always in the hall. I had the mop in my hands and the boy was dying 3 feet from where I stood. And every wolf in the room was looking at Caspian with a particular desperation of predators who do not know how to grieve. I looked at the wound. I looked at the silver spreading like frost beneath the skin of the boy's throat. He was perhaps 16. He smelled like river water and new pine and someone who had not yet done enough living to deserve this particular ending. Put the mop down. Move, I said. The word came out of me at a frequency that had nothing to do with rank. It was not a request. It was not even truly a command. It was something older. Something that lived in the marrow of the Ashen bloodline like a heartbeat that never fully quieted. The wolves around the boy stepped back without understanding why. Caspian turned. His eyes found me across the hall, and for the first time since I had arrived, something in his expression cracked open. What are you? Do not touch me, I said, already moving toward the boy. Do not touch me and do not interfere. I knelt beside the dying wolf. The silver in his wound glittered under the torchlight like something malicious and decorative. I pressed my palm flat against his throat. The cold of the silver hit my skin like a brand in reverse, not burning outward but pulling inward, and I let it. I invited it. The ashen gift was not gentle. It felt like swallowing a mouthful of glass and choosing to let it dissolve. Every nerve in my left hand ignited. My shoulder, the scarred one, the one that remembered the fire, began to glow faintly beneath the fabric of my uniform, a deep amber light pulsing like something breathing. The silver began to move. Not outward. Toward me. I felt it travel through the boy's blood and into my palm in a long, agonizing thread. And I pulled, the way you pull poison from a wound, the way the fire had once pulled everything from me and left only this behind. The boy convulsed once, then went still, then gasped, then breathed. The hall was completely silent. I stood up slowly. My left hand was trembling, not from weakness, but from the sheer electric overload of metabolized silver running circuits through a nervous system that was built to hold it but never found it comfortable. I turned around. Every wolf in the hall was staring at me. Caspian Dre stood 10 feet away. He had not moved. He was not blinking. The storm-gray eyes were no longer idle. They were not curious. They were something I had not seen in them before. Something that looked horribly and unexpectedly like recognition. Voss, he said. Just that. Just my name, my real name, the dead girl's name. In a voice that had lost every layer of authority and landed somewhere raw and terrified beneath. Seraphine Voss. I held his gaze. I let him look at me. I let him see the amber light still fading along my scarred shoulder. I let him see the steadiness in my hands that had nothing to do with submission and everything to do with 7 years of becoming something his pack did not have the vocabulary to name. Yes, I said. My voice did not shake. It had not shaken since the fire. I came back, I said. And I am going to need you to explain something to me, Alpha King. The title sat in the air between us like a drawn blade. I am going to need you to explain to me, I said, why I should not burn this keep to the ground the same way your wolves burned my home. He did not answer. Not immediately. Because Caspian Dre, Alpha King of Ironmoor, the wolf who had never shown fear to anything breathing, had just understood something that changed the entire geometry of his world. The girl he thought his pack had killed 7 years ago had not run, had not hidden, had not come back broken or begging or burning for simple revenge. She had come back patient. She had come back powerful. She had come back knowing every corridor of his keep, every weakness in his guard rotation. Every night Rode drank himself unconscious and left the armory door unlocked. She had come back wearing his pack's uniform and walking his pack's floors and absorbing everything. The way she absorbed silver, the way she absorbed flame, the way the Ashen bloodline absorbed every wound inflicted upon it and converted it into something that could level a mountain if it chose to. The maid on her knees had been studying him. The girl scrubbing ash from his floor had already won. I watched him understand it. I watched the understanding move through him like cold water. The shock, then the reckoning, then something that I had not anticipated and had not budgeted for in any of my 7 years of planning. Something that looked like grief. Real grief. The complicated, ugly kind that does not have clean edges. The kind that knows it has earned itself. "Seraphine," he said again. And this time my name in his mouth did not sound like a weapon being identified. Sounded like a wrong being named. I did not forgive him that night. I want to be clear about that too. Forgiveness was not what I had carried through 7 years of silence and cold floors and absorbing fire until it became part of my blood. But I did not burn the keep down either. Not yet. Not because I could not. Because I had learned something more devastating than destruction. I had learned to make them need me first. The boy who smelled like river water and new pine was breathing steadily by the time I left the hall. I picked up my mop on the way out. The amber light had faded completely from my shoulder. From the outside, I looked exactly like what I had always looked like in this keep. Maid. Nobody. A girl on her knees. But Caspian Dre watched me walk away, and I knew, without turning around, without needing to see it, that the expression on his face was not the one a king wears when he looks at a servant. It was the one a man wears when he realizes the ground beneath his throne has always been hers. The maid is a queen, and queens do not hurry. Queens wait until the moment is theirs. And then they do not ask for the crown. They simply remind everyone in the room that they were never not wearing it. I did not sleep that night. Not from fear. Fear was a luxury I had stopped affording myself somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd year after the fire, when I had finally understood that survival was not an accident but a discipline. I lay on the narrow cot in the servants' quarters and stared at the stone ceiling and listened to the keep breathe around me. Ironmoor Keep had a particular sound at night. It was not quiet. It was never quiet, not with 200 wolves living inside its walls. But the noise changed after midnight the way a river changes when it moves from rapids into deep, slow water. The laughter in the lower halls faded. The clatter of the kitchen died. The heavy boots of the night patrol settled into their rhythm. East corridor, west corridor, the long hall, the courtyard loop, predictable as a heartbeat and just as easy to measure. I had memorized the patrol rotation in my 3rd week. I had memorized everything. That was what the Ashen did. We absorbed. The servants' quarters smelled like tallow candles and damp wool and the faint mineral sharpness of the mountain itself seeping through the stone walls. 8 other women slept in the room with me. I could hear their breathing, the deep, unconscious rhythm of people who had made their peace with where they were. I had not made peace with anything. Peace was not the plan. I turned my left hand over in the dark and studied the faint luminescence still tracing the lines of my palm. It always lasted a few hours after an absorption, the silver residue working its way through my system, being broken down, being used. The Ashen body did not waste what it consumed. Every piece of silver I had pulled from the boy's blood tonight would sit in my cells like stored ammunition, quiet and dense and waiting. My shoulder ached dully where the old scar tissue pulled tight. The scars ran from my left shoulder blade down to the base of my ribs, long branching lines, almost beautiful in the right light, like river tributaries seen from above. They were not from the fire. Or rather, they were not from the fire in the way most people would understand. They were what happened when an Ashen girl, 12 years old and completely untrained, survived a conflagration that should have killed her and absorbed more raw thermal energy in a single night than a grown adult with years of practice could safely hold. The power had to go somewhere. It had written itself into my body like a signature. I heard the footsteps outside the door at 3:30 in the morning. Not patrol boots. The patrol wore heavy-soled leather with iron heel caps, a sound like deliberate punctuation, regular and authoritative. These footsteps were different. Softer. Slower. The footsteps of someone who did not want to be heard but was not practiced enough at silence to fully disappear into it. I closed my hand and closed my eyes and made my breathing deep, and even before the door opened. The candlelight moved across the inside of my eyelids, warm orange shifting as whoever held it stepped into the room. I felt them pause at the threshold. I felt them scan the room the way a predator scans a clearing, not frantically, but with a particular focused patience of someone looking for one specific thing. The candlelight moved again. Closer. It stopped at the foot of my cot. I gave it 4 more seconds. Then I opened my eyes. Caspian Dre stood at the foot of my bed holding a candle in one hand, and looking at me with an expression I did not have a clean category for. He was not wearing his authority tonight. That was the only way I knew how to describe it. In the hall in the daylight, he wore dominance the way other men wore coats. Automatically, completely, without thinking about it. Standing here in the servants' quarters in a plain gray shirt with his dark hair unruly from what I suspected was not sleep but the absence of it. He looked like someone who had taken the coat off and found the cold surprising. He looked, against every expectation I had built over 7 years of imagining this man, uncertain. I sat up slowly. I did not pull the blanket up. I did not make myself smaller. I looked at him with the full, flat steadiness that I had cultivated like a skill, and I waited. "I needed to know you were real," he said. His voice was very low. Not a whisper was a choice, and this was something else, something that happened below the level of choice. "I am real," I said. "I noticed that," he said. He did not sit. He did not move closer. He stood at the foot of my cot like a man standing at the edge of something he was not certain would hold his weight. The candlelight made the planes of his face complicated. Shadow where I expected certainty, light where I expected hardness. "How long have you been here?" he asked. 11 weeks, I said. Something moved behind his eyes. 11 weeks, he repeated slowly, as though he was placing each word down with care. "I walked in through the servants' gate," I said. "I gave the head housekeeper a reference letter from a pack in the lowlands that does not technically exist." Pause. "She did not verify it," I said. "No," he said. "She would not have thought to." "No," I agreed. "Your security operates on the assumption that a threat announces itself." He was quiet for a long moment. The candle flame moved between us in a draft I could not locate. "You could have killed me 11 weeks ago," he said. It was not an accusation. It was the sound of a man doing arithmetic he did not enjoy. "Yes," I said. "Why did you not?" I looked at him for a long time before I answered. The answer was complicated, and I did not owe him the complicated version. But I found, which surprised me in a way I did not entirely welcome, that I wanted to give it to him anyway. "Because death is not accountability," I said. "Death is just an ending." I let that sit in the air between us. "I did not come back for an ending," I said. "I came back for a reckoning." He left before the patrol's next pass. He did not say anything else. He simply looked at me for a long moment with those storm-gray eyes that were doing something I could not fully read, and then he turned and took the candlelight with him, and the room went back to darkness and the sound of 8 women breathing in their untroubled sleep. I lay back down. I did not sleep. But I noticed, for the first time since I had arrived, that the cold in the room felt slightly different. Not warmer. It was different. Like something in the air had shifted a single degree. I noted it and filed it away and told myself firmly that it did not matter. I was not here for him. I was here for the truth of what happened 7 years ago, and for the specific names of every wolf who had stood in the treeline and laughed while cedar burned. I was here to make them understand what they had made. Whatever Caspian Dre felt or did not feel at the foot of my bed at 3 in the morning was not part of the plan. I was very clear about that. The next morning arrived in the gray, grudging way that mountain mornings did. Not with warmth or welcome, but with the simple mechanical insistence of light returning whether the world was ready or not. I was in the east corridor by 5 with a bucket of cold water and a horsehair brush, working at a section of grout between the flagstones that had gone black with mildew. The work was physical and repetitive and required just enough attention to occupy the surface of my mind while the deeper parts of me processed and planned. I had been doing my best thinking in the east corridor for 11 weeks. I heard them before I smelled them. 3 sets of footsteps. Not pack wolves, not Ironmoor cadence. Different rhythm. Harder heel strike. The particular flat-footed confidence of men who were guests and knew that guest status gave them latitude. I pressed myself closer to the wall and kept scrubbing and went completely, deliberately invisible. They rounded the corner from the north stairwell, and I had enough peripheral vision to take them in without lifting my head. 3 men. All large. All wearing the gray and black colors of the Greymount faction, the allied pack system that operated out of the Northern Territories, cold and methodical and historically unbothered by the finer points of honor. The one in the center was the tallest. He had close-cropped silver hair despite being perhaps 30 years old. A genetic trait of the Greymount bloodline, I recalled from the extensive research I had done in the 2 years before returning here. His name was Aldrich Crane. He was the Greymount faction's head of intelligence. He was, by every account I had assembled, one of the most dangerous minds in pack politics. And he was looking directly at me. Not the way men look at maids. Not the dismissive, sliding glance that sees the uniform and moves on. He was looking at me the way I looked at things I needed to understand. With specific, unhurried attention. My stomach did something cold and quiet. Kept scrubbing. "Girl," he said. I looked up with the blank, mild expression I had perfected. The face of someone who is present but not particularly inhabited. "Yes, sir," said. "How long have you worked in this keep?" he asked. His voice was pleasant. That was the tell. Men with genuinely pleasant voices do not sound this calibrated. "Since autumn, sir," I said. 3 months, near enough. "And before that?" "The Low March Pack," I said. "In the valley." I had prepared for this question. I had prepared for every question. He tilted his head exactly 1 degree to the right. "The Low March Pack dissolved 2 years ago," he said pleasantly. "There was a territorial dispute." And blinked. Slowly. "I was not aware of that, sir," I said. "I left before the trouble." He studied me for 3 more seconds, then smiled, then moved on. I kept scrubbing until their footsteps had completely faded. Then I sat back on my heels and pressed my clean hand flat against the cold stone floor and focused on the sensation, the grit of it, the absolute physical reality of it, until my heartbeat returned to something I could work with. Aldrich Crane had not believed me. He had not disbelieved me either. He had filed me somewhere in between, in the category of things that required further examination, and men like Aldrich Crane did not leave that category unattended for long. I had perhaps 48 hours before he found a thread to pull. I picked up the brush and went back to work. The problem with timelines, I reflected, was that they were only as reliable as the variables you could control. I had controlled everything in Ironmoor for 11 weeks because I had been the only variable that mattered. Aldrich Crane's presence changed the mathematics entirely. I needed information. I needed to know why the Greymount faction was here, how long they intended to stay, and most critically, what Aldrich Crane specifically had been sent to find. Because men like him were not sent as courtesy. They were sent as instruments. The question was whose hand was on the grip. I found my answer in the kitchen at noon. The kitchen was the information center of any pack keep, not because the wolves who cooked and served were careless, but because they were overlooked, and overlooked people heard everything. I had befriended the head cook, a broad-shouldered woman named Dorla, in my second week. Not manipulatively. Or not only manipulatively. Dorla was sharp and dry and deeply funny in the way of people who have watched the powerful make fools of themselves for decades without anyone noticing the witness. I liked her. That was an inconvenient truth I had stopped arguing with. The silver-haired one asked about the incident in the hall last night, Dorla said without preamble, handing me a bowl of something hot and not asking whether I wanted it. I sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the bowl and felt the warmth move into my palms. Already, I said. He spoke to Ro at breakfast, Dorla said. Ro told him it was a healing. Did Ro say who did the healing? Dorla looked at me. The look was long and complicated and contained within it several things she had clearly been holding since last night. He said it was a servant girl, she said. He did not give a name. Because he does not know my name, I said. Ro does not know anyone's name below beta rank, Dorla said. Which has occasionally been useful, I said. And is currently very useful, she agreed. She sat down across from me with her own bowl and did not look away from my face. Sarah, she said. It was the first time she had used my name as the beginning of a serious sentence. That was not a healing, she said quietly. What I saw in that hall last night was not something healers do. I met her eyes. Dorla was not a wolf with political ambitions or pack hierarchy obsessions. She was a woman who had been in this keep for 20 years and had learned to read what she saw with clear, unromantic accuracy. She deserved the truth. Or a version of it. No, I said. It was not. What are you? She asked. Not unkindly. With the directness of someone who has decided that kindness and directness are not mutually exclusive. Something old, I said. Something the pack has not dealt with in a long time. Dorla was quiet for a moment, turning her spoon in her bowl. Are you going to hurt people in this keep? She asked. I thought about the boy breathing steadily in the infirmary. I thought about the 8 women sleeping peacefully in the servants' quarters. I thought about Dorla herself, who had given me extra bread without comment on the nights I came in from the cold corridors too exhausted to be strategic about hunger. Not the people who do not deserve it, I said. Dorla nodded once, with the finality of a decision made. Then eat your soup, she said. And be careful of the silver-haired man. I know, I said. He is not careful in return, she said. That is what makes him dangerous. I spent the afternoon being a perfect maid. This was not nothing. The performance of invisibility required its own specific energy. The calibrated movements, the downward gaze that was attentive without being watchful, the responses that were present without being there. I changed the linens in the guest quarters on the upper east floor. I noted which room Aldrich Crane had been given. The corner suite, the one with sight lines on both the main courtyard and the north gate. He had chosen it himself. He had not been assigned it. That told me something. I noted that he traveled with a locked iron case the size of a document box. I noted that one of his 2 companions did not leave his side, while the other moved through the keep independently. The independent one was the one I needed to watch. His name, I learned from a junior wolf who talked too freely near the linen cupboard, was Vesson. He had been in Ironmoor before. Not recently. 7 years ago, give or take. I set the folded sheet down on the linen shelf very slowly. 7 years ago. 7 years ago, Vesson of the Greymount faction had been in Ironmoor. The night of the fire had been 7 years ago. I stood in the linen cupboard for a long moment with a smell of clean cotton and cedar blocks filling my nose and the implications of this information moving through me like silver, cold and deliberate and working its way into everything. The Ironmoor Pack had not acted alone. I had suspected this. I had built the suspicion carefully over years of careful research, following threads from pack records and territorial disputes and old alliance documents that did not quite add up. But suspicion was not evidence. Vesson was not evidence either. Not yet. But he was the first thread I had found that led somewhere concrete. I found Caspian in the war room at dusk. Not by accident. By the simple application of the patrol schedule I had memorized, and the knowledge that he reviewed territorial maps every evening before the meal. I knocked on the open door with a particular knock of someone who belongs there. Not tentative, not aggressive, the knock of a person with a reason. He looked up from the table. The maps were spread before him. Great parchment sheets marked with borders and packed territories, and the careful notations of a man who understood that geography was politics made physical. He did not look surprised to see me. That itself was information. "Close the door," he said. I closed it behind me. The war room smelled like old parchment and cold iron, and the beeswax of the candles burning in their iron stands along the walls. I walked to the edge of the map table and looked at him across it. "Aldrich Crane is asking questions about last night," I said. "I know," he said. "He asked me this morning. What did you tell him?" "That we had a healing incident with a silver wound and that it was handled." "He did not believe that was the complete account," I said. "No," Caspian said. "He did not." He studied me for a moment across the maps. "You know who he is," he said. "Head of intelligence for the Greymount faction," I said. "Yes." "Then you know he does not leave incomplete accounts alone." "No," I said. "He does not." I placed both hands flat on the edge of the map table. "One of his men was in Ironmoor 7 years ago," I said. Something shifted in Caspian's face. It was subtle, the kind of shift that a person trained in watching people catches and a person focused on other things might miss entirely. But I was not focused on other things. I was always focused on this. "Vesson," I said. The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. I watched the ripples move across Caspian's expression. Recognition, then something darker. Then the controlled blankness of a man slamming a door on a room he does not want to be in. "Where did you hear that name?" he said. His voice had changed. It had gone very quiet in a way that was not the same as his 3 a.m. quiet from last night. This was the quiet of something pulling taut. "A junior wolf with poor conversational boundaries," I said. "Near the linen cupboard." He straightened. He moved away from the table and turned toward the window, and I watched his back, the broad set of his shoulders, the way his hands closed at his sides without becoming fists, the controlled deliberateness of a man managing something large in a small container. "Caspian," I said. I did not use his title. I did not know when I had stopped using his title. He turned back to me. His eyes were not stormy now. They were very still. The stillness of deep water. "Vesson was here 7 years ago because I invited him," he said. The words came out with a flat, braced quality of someone choosing to step on a wound to prove it still hurts. I did not move. I did not let anything show. I had known this was a possibility. I had built my plans around this being a possibility. But knowing a thing as an intellectual construct and hearing it confirmed in a human voice were not the same experience. And the amber light beneath my left shoulder blade flared once, hot and involuntary, before I pulled it back. "Why?" I said. One word. No inflection. The question was not about information. It was about making him say it. "Because the Greymount faction wanted your family's land," he said. "They had been pressuring my pack for 2 seasons, threatening border disputes, threatening to withdraw the Northern Alliance." He held my gaze without flinching, which was the first thing he had done that I had not predicted. "I was 18 years old," he said. "I was 6 months into the Alpha title, and I was terrified of losing everything my family had built, and I made a decision that I have not had a single night of peace from since." The room was very quiet. The candles moved. "I did not know you were in the house," he said. "I was told it was empty." "It was not empty," I said. "No," he said. "It was not." I stood across the map table from the man who had given the order that killed my family and looked at him with everything I had spent 7 years building. Every wall, every layer of cold purpose, every carefully constructed distance, and felt it all holding, solid and intact, and also felt something underneath it that I had not budgeted for. Not forgiveness. I had been truthful about that. Not softness. I was not built for softness anymore. Something more uncomfortable than either. The recognition that he was not the uncomplicated monster I had needed him to be. Monsters were easier. Monsters did not stand in candlelight with their hands open at their sides and tell you the truth when lying would have been simpler. The Greymount faction did not keep their end, he said. They took the land and then escalated their border claims anyway. He said it without asking me to find it meaningful. He said it the way people offer information that they know does not change anything but belongs in the record anyway. "And Vesson is here now," I said. "Yes," he said. "With Aldrich Crane. Because they have found out what I am," I said. It was not a question. I had arrived at it while he was talking, all the pieces locking together with a specific cold click of a mechanism that has been building toward this point for much longer than you realized. Aldrich Crane was head of intelligence. Crane's intelligence network had eyes in every pack keep in the Northern Territories. Something had happened in this hall last night. Something unmistakable and luminous and witnessed by every wolf in the room. And now Crane was here with Vesson, who knew the name Voss, who knew the history, who knew that the Ashen bloodline had supposedly died in a fire 7 years ago in Ironmoor territory. Crane had not come to Ironmoor by coincidence. He had come because his network had told him that something Ashen was alive and walking inside Ironmoor Keep. And he had come to collect it. "They want to use me," I said. The words were very clear and very cold in my own mouth. "Ashen power absorbed and metabolized silver," I said. "An Ashen person could theoretically walk through silver defenses, neutralize silver weapons, absorb the silver compounds used in anti-wolf fortifications." I watched Caspian's face confirm everything I was saying without him needing to speak. "Greymount has been pushing against the Highland packs for 3 seasons, I said. "The Highland packs use silver boundary markers and silver-tipped arrows." "Yes," he said. "They want a weapon," I said. "That is what I am to them." "That is what you would be," he said, "if they got their hands on you." I looked at him. "And what am I to you?" Yes. The question was not soft. It was not an invitation. It was the sharpest thing I had said to him because it had the most edges, and I asked it deliberately because I needed to know the answer before the next 48 hours made every decision for me. Caspian Dre looked at me across the maps of his territory, across the parchment record of everything he was responsible for, everything he had inherited, everything he had nearly destroyed at 18 years old in a decision he had been paying for ever since, and said very quietly, "Someone who has every right to be here." He paused. "Someone who deserves to know everything I know." He paused again. "Someone I will not allow to be taken from this keep." I held the eye contact for a long time. Long enough to look for the politics in it, the calculation, the self-interest that might be wearing the costume of principle. I was very good at finding those things. I did not find them. Then we have approximately 48 hours, I said, before Crane finishes pulling the thread he has started. Yes, he said. Tell me about the locked iron case, I said. He went very still. You saw it, he said. I see everything, I said. In this keep. A long moment. The candles moved. It is a containment device, he said slowly. Greymount has been developing them for 2 years. Containment for what? Said. Though I already knew. And I needed him to say it. For Ashen individuals, he said. The case generates a suppression field. Raw silver compound suspended in a crystalline lattice. Enough to hold an Ashen person's power down. Theoretically, he said. Enough to transport one. I absorbed that information the same way I absorbed everything. Completely. Letting it move through me, letting it settle, letting it become part of what I was working with rather than something that was working against me. Theoretically, I said. Yes, he said. Only theoretically. 'Cause no one had ever tested it. Because the Greymount faction had been building a containment device for an Ashen subject, and the last known Ashen had died in a fire in Ironmoor 7 years ago. Except she had not died. She had absorbed the fire. She had spent 7 years learning exactly how much she could hold. And she was standing in this room right now. And the amber light beneath her shoulder blade was steady and warm and very, very patient. I need you to do something for me, I said. Caspian waited. I need you to invite Aldrich Crane to dinner tomorrow night, I said. I need him at the main table in the Great Hall. You want him where you can see him, he said. I want him where he thinks he can see me, I said. There is a difference. I straightened. I smoothed the front of my uniform. I was still the maid. I was still the woman with the horsehair brush and the cold bucket of water and the blank and mild expression. But in this room, in this light, with 7 years of accumulated purpose burning steady and low in my chest, I let Caspian Dre see the rest of it. The parts that were not mild. The parts that the fire had built. He looked at me the way he had looked at me in the hall the night before. Not with the idle curiosity of a predator encountering something unexpected, but with the full, complicated attention of a man who understood that the thing standing in front of him was not a threat to be neutralized. It was a force to be reckoned. And it had been inside his walls for 11 weeks. And it had always been in control. Dinner, he said. Tomorrow night. Yes, I said. I moved toward the door. Sarah, he said. Stop. I did not turn around. I am sorry, he said. Not the easy version. Not the version that asks for something in return. The version that simply puts a truth in the room and leaves it there. I stood at the door with my hand on the iron latch and let the words move through me. I did not know yet what to do with them. That was honest. I did not know yet. And I was not going to pretend I did just to make the moment simpler. I know, I said. And I went back to being the maid. For one more night. Tomorrow Sarah would come to dinner. Not the maid. Not the dead girl. Not the ghost of someone they thought they had erased from the world. Seraphine Voss would sit at that table. And Aldrich Crane, with his silver case and his careful questions and his network of watchers, would understand, too late and all at once, that he had not come to Ironmoor to collect a weapon. He had walked into the home of one. The morning of the dinner arrived the way all consequential mornings do. Without fanfare. Without the dramatic wait the night before had promised. Just grey light pressing through the narrow servant's window, and the smell of frost on stone, and the sound of Ironmoor keep waking itself into another day that did not yet know what it was going to become. I was already awake. I had not been asleep. I lay on my narrow cot and watched the light change from black to gray to the particular blue-white of mountain morning, and I ran through everything one final time. Not from anxiety. From the same discipline that had carried me through 7 years of rebuilding a self from ash and electricity, and the stubborn, furious insistence on surviving long enough to matter. I ran through the keep's layout. Every corridor. Every exit. Every load-bearing weakness in the Great Hall's eastern wall that I had identified in week 4 and quietly confirmed in week 7. I ran through the guest roster. Crane, Vesson, and the third man, whose name I had learned was Pell, a former military wolf with a burn scar across his jaw and the flat, reliable eyes of someone who follows orders without requiring reasons. Pell was the one who would move first if things became physical. I had planned for that. I had planned for everything. Or nearly everything. The thing I had not fully planned for was the way Caspian's voice had sounded the night before when he said "I am sorry," and the way it had continued to move through me in the dark hours like a frequency I could not quite tune out. I noted it. I set it aside. Got up. I dressed in my uniform for the last time. The gray dress. The white apron. The flat shoes that made no sound on stone. I put them on with the deliberateness of someone who understands that what they are wearing is still a costume, even on the final day, and that the costume still has work to do. I looked at my reflection in the small water-spotted mirror above the wash basin. The girl who looked back was unremarkable. Brown hair pulled back. A face that had learned to hold no particular expression. Shadows under dark eyes that could read as exhaustion or could read as nothing, depending on whether you were looking closely. Aldrich Crane would not be looking closely. Not at a maid. That was the last time that would ever work in my favor, and I intended to spend it well. The day passed in the particular slow agony of days that are waiting for their evening. I worked. Course I worked. I scrubbed and polished and carried and folded and did all the 1,000 small physical tasks that the keep required, and I did them with the same quiet competence I had brought to every previous day. Several wolves passed me in the corridors. None of them looked at me. Vesson passed me on the east stair at mid-morning. He did not look at me either. But he paused on the step above mine for just a fraction of a second longer than foot traffic required, and I felt the pause the way you feel weather changing, not as a fact but as a pressure shift, something moving in the air before it declares itself. He was close. He had not found the name yet, but he was close to the name, and close was the most dangerous place for him to be, because close meant he would stop being careful and start being urgent. Urgent men made noise. Urgent men tripped wires. I needed him at that dinner table before he became urgent. Dorla found me at 3 in the afternoon in the linen corridor. She did not say anything. She pressed a folded piece of cloth into my hands, looked at me with a long, complicated look of a woman who has decided to trust something she cannot entirely explain, and walked away. I unfolded the cloth in the privacy of the nearest storage room. It was a dress. Deep green, almost black in low light, with long sleeves and a high neck and the kind of quiet, severe elegance that announces itself without requiring decoration. It was Dorla's. Or it had been Dorla's once, a long time ago, in a life before keeps and kitchens and 20 years of watching the powerful from a deliberate distance. It fit me as though it had been cut for my specific dimensions. I stood in the storage room among the smell of clean linen and dried lavender and held the dress against my chest and experienced something that I was not prepared for. A sudden, sharp, completely inconvenient grief for all the versions of myself that had not survived to stand in this room. 12-year-old girl. The daughter. The sister. The child who had run through pine forests without calculating exit routes, who had slept without listening to patrol schedules, who had been loved by people who did not require her to be a weapon before they found her worth keeping. I let the grief move through me. I did not fight it. That was something I had learned in the 3rd year. That grief denied does not dissolve, it calcifies, And calcified grief will make a person brittle at exactly the moment they need to be flexible. I let it move. I let it pass. Put the dress on. The great hall at dinner smelled like roasted meat and burning pine and the heavy territorial musk of wolves performing civilization at a table. 12 places had been set. Caspian at the head. His senior wolves flanking him. Roe at his right, the pack's elder advisor Marin at his left. The Grey Mount contingent opposite. Crane at the position of honored guest, directly across the table from the Alpha King. Vesson beside him. Pell at the end, equidistant between exits because Pell was a man who always positioned himself equidistant between exits. I had noted the seating from the doorway. I had noted all of it. Then I walked in. The room did not stop. Rooms do not stop for maids. That was the last thing the costume gave me. The final seconds before Aldrich Crane looked up from his wine and his gaze traveled the room with a habitual assessment of a man who was never not working. His gaze reached me. Moved on. Came back. I watched the moment happen behind his eyes. The catalogue, the comparison, the reference check against something in his memory or his intelligence files that matched a frequency he was not expecting to find at a dinner table in a Grey Wolf's Keep. I was already walking toward my position at the side table. Hurried. Even. The measured pace of someone who belongs here. But Crane was rising from his seat. And Vesson, who had been lifting his wine cup, went completely still. "Stop," Crane said. Not loudly. He did not need to be loud. The word had the quality of something structural, a command that expected the room to reorganize itself around the sound. The room did. Conversation ended. Heads turned. I stopped walking. I turned to face him. And I stopped performing. All of it. The mild eyes, the carefully held blankness, the deliberate absence of presence that I had worn like a second skin for 11 weeks. I let it go. Not dramatically. Not with a gesture or a declaration. I simply stopped holding it. And what was underneath it filled the room the way heat fills a space. Not visible, but immediately, undeniably felt by every wolf in it. Every wolf in the room felt their instincts say something old and unnameable. Every wolf in the room looked at the woman standing in the green dress in the candlelight and experienced the specific, animal recognition of something that was not prey and was not predator in any category their instincts had prepared them for. Something older. Something other. Something that had been here before they had words for it. Crane's silver eyes moved from my face to my left hand, where the faintest luminescence was tracing the lines of my palm. Not fully lit, just present, the way embers are present, patient and potential. "Ashen," he said. The word came out of him like a breath released after long holding. Like a man who has been looking for something for years and has found it somewhere that rearranges everything. "The Voss girl," Vesson said from beside him. His voice had a different quality. Not excitement. Recognition layered over something that might, in a better man, have been shame. "You are dead," Vesson said. "You are demonstrably wrong about that," I said. Crane moved first. He did not reach for a weapon. He was too sophisticated for that, too practiced in the art of force through architecture rather than action. He looked at Caspian. "Alpha King," he said pleasantly. "I think we need to discuss your staff hiring decisions." "Sit down, Crane," Caspian said. His voice was very level. "This is a conversation we are going to have at the table, as civilized men." "Of course," Crane said. He sat. He did not look like a man who had been denied anything. He looked like a man who had chosen to wait. Men like Crane were always choosing to wait. The waiting was the weapon. Caspian looked at me across the table and the candles and the wreckage of the dinner that had barely started. I read his face. He was holding the room together by the authority of his presence alone, and he was doing it well, But Crane had 3 wolves in this keep and contacts outside it, and the iron case upstairs in the corner suite, and every second that passed was a second Crane was spending on his next move. I walked to the table. I did not take a servant's position. I pulled out the empty chair to Caspian's immediate right. The chair that had sat empty for as long as I had been in this keep. The chair that the pack did not speak about because the speaking of it was its own kind of grief, and I sat down. The room absorbed this. Marin, the elder advisor, made a sound that was not quite a word. Ro looked at Caspian with an expression that was asking several questions simultaneously. Crane looked at me with his head tilted and his pleasant face doing something more complicated underneath. "Well," he said, "this is clarifying. Let me be clear about what is happening here," I said. My voice carried in the hall without effort. The Ashen had voices built for carrying. Another inheritance, another gift from blood that understood that presence was not always physical. You came to this keep because your intelligence network told you that something Ashen was alive inside it, I said. You brought a containment device because you intended to leave with that something. I looked at the iron case sitting beside Crane's chair, which he had brought to the table with the casualness of a man making a point. I want to tell you something about that case, I said. Crane's expression did not change. It will not work, I said. We have tested the design extensively, he said. Against what subject? Said Oz. We have run calculations. You have run calculations based on historical records of Ashen individuals who had not spent 7 years deliberately increasing their capacity, I said. You have run calculations based on a version of this power that existed before a 12-year-old girl spent a night absorbing a fire large enough to level a cedar house. I held his gaze. You have built a cage for a candle, I said. And you have brought it to a bonfire. The silence in the hall was absolute. And then Pell moved. He moved from the end of the table with the practiced efficiency of a former military wolf. Fast, economical, no wasted motion. And he had the iron case open before anyone had fully registered that he was in motion. The suppression field hit the room like a pressure change. Every wolf at the table flinched. The field was not subtle. It was a wave of silver compound suspended in crystalline lattice, exactly as Caspian had described, radiating outward from the case in a slow, deliberate pulse designed to find Ashen cells and compress them. I felt it hit my nervous system. I will be truthful about that. I felt it the way I had felt the silver in the dying boy's blood, as a cold, deliberate intrusion, a thing that wanted to reach inside me and close a fist around what lived there. My left hand lit. Not the faint luminescence of a calm evening. Full amber ignition, running from my palm to my wrist to the inside of my elbow, branching exactly the way the scars branched across my back. The same pattern, the same map, the same record of a night when a child had held more fire than her body knew how to carry. She knew how to carry it now. I stood up from the chair. I did not reach for anything. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood, and the amber light came with me. And I turned it toward the suppression field the way you turn a lens toward sunlight, gathering it, focusing it, letting the Ashen gift do what it had been built across generations to do. I absorbed it. The crystalline lattice of silver compound hit the edge of what I was carrying and did not compress it, did not slow it, did not touch it. It dissolved into me the way everything dissolved into me, the way fire had dissolved into me. The way silver had dissolved into the boy's wound and come into my palm and become part of my stored reserves. The case gave one shuddering pulse. And then it went dark. Completely. Very expensive box. Crane was on his feet. His composure had not broken. I had expected it would not. But it had cracked, which was more interesting because composure that breaks can be rebuilt quickly, but composure that cracks shows you the thing inside it. What was inside Aldrich Crane's composure was fury. Not hot fury. Cold fury. The fury of a man who has planned something for a very long time and has encountered, for the first time, a variable he did not account for. "Take her," he said. He said it to Pell and to Vesson and to his third man who had appeared in the doorway. And his voice was still pleasant, which was the most frightening version of that voice. Pell moved. Vesson moved. The third man moved. And Caspian Dre came out of his chair. What happened next lasted perhaps 40 seconds. Felt longer. It always feels longer, the moments that matter. They expand to hold everything that is at stake inside them, stretching time to fit the weight. Caspian reached Pell first. He was faster than a man his size should have been. But alpha wolves were not built by ordinary standards, and Caspian Dre had not kept the Ironmoor Pack's respect for 7 years on the strength of his political acumen alone. He caught Pell's arm. He did not do it gently. The sound of the impact was significant and final, and Pell went down and did not come back up immediately. Roe and 2 other Ironmoor wolves were on their feet. The third Greymount man pulled a blade. It was silver-edged. I saw it catch the candlelight. I saw it arc toward Caspian's side. Moved. I do not have a cleaner way to describe it. I did not decide. I did not calculate. I moved, and the amber light moved with me. And I put myself between the blade and the alpha king of the pack that had burned my house down, and I caught the flat of the silver edge against my forearm. The pain was extraordinary. I will not pretend otherwise. Silver against ashen skin, direct contact without the buffer of someone else's bloodstream, was like pressing your arm against a brand. Immediate, total, consuming. My vision went white at the edges. The scars across my back lit like a second spine, every branching line igniting in sequence from base to shoulder with the amber light flooding through them. And the power in my chest surged in response to the pain the way it always surged in response to damage. Converting it, using it, making it into something that was not weakness. I closed my hand around the silver blade. Bare hand. Full grip. The wolf holding it looked at me with an expression that passed through shock and arrived at something close to awe. I pulled the silver into myself through my palm. Not the metal, the silver compound, the anti-wolf compound woven into the blade's edge, the thing that made it a weapon in this context. I pulled it the way I pulled everything. With patience. With purpose. With the total, absolute confidence of a woman who had been built for this at a cellular level and had spent 7 years learning every room in that building. The blade in my hand went gray. And dull. Then it was simply metal, ordinary and useless. And I released it, and it fell, and it rang against the stone floor with the flat, conclusive sound of something that has lost its reason. The room was very still. I became aware, in the aftermath of the amber surge, that I was glowing. Not faintly. Not in the tracing light way of a calm evening's residue. I was lit from within, every scar line on my back visible through the fabric of Dorla's green dress, branching and luminous, a river map of power that had been written into me by a fire that had tried and catastrophically failed to end me. My left hand was at full amber ignition. My right hand, the one that had held the blade, was healing visibly, the silver burns closing in real time as the metabolized compound fed the process, giving back what it had taken. I stood in the great hall of Ironmoor Keep in the candlelight and let them see it. All of it. No costume. No performance. No careful calibration of how much to reveal. I let them see what 7 years of silence and scrubbing floors and absorbing damage had built. Aldrich Crane stood across the table from me. His pleasant face had completed its cracking. What was underneath the composure was not, in the end, fury. It was fear. Real fear. The specific, clarifying fear of a man who has spent his career believing that every power has a containment and has just encountered the proof that he was wrong. "You cannot be taken," he said. Came out quiet. Almost wondering. like a man who has run a very long calculation and arrived at an answer that restructures everything he thought he knew. "No," I said. "I cannot." "And the Ironmoor Alpha," he said slowly. "He knows what you are." "He does," I said. "And he chose to stand between you and a silver blade," Crane said. "Yes," I said. "Even knowing what you came back here to do." I looked at Caspian. He was standing 2 feet to my left, and he had a cut above his brow from the initial struggle with Pell, and he was looking at me with an expression that I had finally found a category for. Not guilt. Not calculation. Not the complex, layered politics of an alpha king managing a supernatural variable inside his territory. Something simpler. Something that a man shows when he has stopped managing and started simply being present in a moment, with all the risk that implies. "What I came back here to do," I said, and I looked away from Caspian and back to Crane because this was the part that needed to be said clearly, needed to be on the record, needed to be the thing that Greymount's head of intelligence carried back to his faction as the definitive account of this evening. "Has changed." Crane waited. "I came back for a reckoning," I said. "I came back to make the Ironmoor Pack understand what they made when they made me." Pause. "They understand," I said. "And I came back to find the names of every wolf who stood in the treeline the night of the fire." I looked at Vesson. Vesson, who had been very still for the last several minutes, looked back at me with a particular expression of a man who has known this moment was coming for 7 years and has spent 7 years hoping that it would not be as bad as he imagined. "I have the names," I said. "I obtained them from the Ironmoor Alliance records in the East Archive in Week 6. Vesson closed his eyes. "3 of those wolves are still living," I said. "They are not in this keep." "No," he said. His voice was barely sound. "They are in Greymount territory," I said. "Under faction protection." Crane said nothing. "You will remove that protection," I said. "You will allow the Ironmoor Pack to conduct a formal tribunal under interpack law." I let the silence sit for a moment. "Or," I said, "I will conduct my own tribunal." I held up my amber-lit hand. "And I will not require a room," I said. Aldrich Crane was a sophisticated man. He had not reached his position by being inflexible, by failing to read the architecture of a situation and understand when it had fundamentally altered. He looked at me. He looked at Caspian. He looked at the inert iron case. He looked at the silver blade lying flat and useless on the stone floor. He made the calculation that sophisticated men make when they have walked into a room expecting to take something and discovered that the something in question has been waiting for them with a patience and a power that was never, not for a single moment, in any real danger from anything they brought. "The tribunal can be arranged," he said. "Good," I said. "You will also withdraw the Greymount faction's territorial claims against the Ironmoor borderlands." "Those claims are long-standing. They were purchased with the blood of my family," I said. "And I am voiding the transaction." The amber light in my hand pulsed once. Steadily. Like a heartbeat that had no intention of stopping. "You will withdraw the claims," I said. "Or we will revisit what my capacity is for sustained output." Smiled. It was not a warm smile. But it was a real one. "I have been absorbing silver and flame for 7 years," I said. "I have a great deal of stored energy. I have nowhere pressing to be." Crane withdrew the claims. He withdrew them in writing at the dinner table, on Ironmoor Pack parchment, signed in the presence of every wolf in that hall. Then he left. He took Vesson and Pell and the third man, and he took the useless iron case, and he walked out of Ironmoor Keep in the dark of the mountain night without another word. He did not look back. I watched from the great hall doorway until the sound of horses had completely faded. Then I listened to the silence they left behind. The hall emptied slowly. Row left, with the careful neutrality of a man who has witnessed something that will require significant private processing. Marin left, pausing at the door to look at me with an expression I could not fully read but that contained within it, I thought, something that was not entirely unlike respect. The other wolves filtered out. The candles burned down. The pine in the fire crackled and settled. And then it was just the two of us in the great hall, the Alpha King of Ironmoor with a cut above his brow, and the girl his pack had made. Seraphine, he said. My full name. Both syllables. With the weight of someone who has been carrying a name as a debt and is finally saying it as something else. I turned from the doorway. I walked back to the table. I sat in the chair to his right. The empty chair, the chair that the pack did not speak about. And I looked at the remains of the dinner and the inert candle holders and the ring left by Crane's wine cup on the parchment tablecloth, and I let myself be tired. Genuinely tired. Not weak. Not diminished. Just tired in the way that people are tired after they have carried something very heavy for a very long way and have finally, with full knowledge of what they are doing, chosen to set it down. Not permanently. Not naively. But for this moment. In this chair. In this hall that smelled like pine and iron and the aftermath of something that had finally gone the way it needed to go. Caspian sat beside me. Not across the table. Beside me. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the particular warmth of an alpha wolf, deep and cellular, the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with proximity to something alive and powerful and present. The tribunal, he said. Yes, I said. I will make it happen, he said. I know, I said. And after. I looked at him. The cut above his brow had closed. Wolf healing, efficient and unremarkable. His storm-gray eyes were steady, asking a real question. Not what happens to the threat. Not what happens to the arrangement. What happens after. To the person. To the girl in the green dress who had walked into his keep with a reference letter from a pack that did not exist and spent 11 weeks memorizing his corridors and absorbing his silver and scrubbing his floors on her knees with hands that could have leveled his walls. What did she want? After. I looked around the great hall. The stone walls. The iron sconces. The long table that had held tonight's reckoning and would hold 100 more ordinary dinners after this one. The chair I was sitting in, that had sat empty for reasons no one would say aloud, that fit me as though Dorla's dress had been made for my dimensions. I thought about 12 years old and pine forests and cedar walls and a family that had smelled like wood smoke and warmth and the specific, irreplaceable scent of people who love you without requiring you to be useful first. I thought about the fire. I thought about what the fire had taken. I thought about what the fire had, despite its worst intentions, also given. I thought about a boy who smelled like river water and new pine, breathing steadily in an infirmary. I thought about Dorla, who had pressed a folded dress into my hands without asking for an explanation. I thought about 7 years. What they had cost. What they had built. I do not know yet, I said. It was the most honest thing I had said in a very long time. Maybe the most honest thing I had said since before the fire. Caspian nodded. He did not push. He did not offer solutions or assurances or the kind of forward-looking statements that men in positions of power reach for when they want to resolve discomfort quickly. He simply sat beside me in the hall that smelled like pine and iron and let the not knowing exist in the room without trying to fill it. That was, I thought, worth noting. That was, I thought, a beginning. Not a resolution. Not a fairy tale. Beginning. Which was something I had not expected to find when I walked through the servants' gate 11 weeks ago. I had expected reckoning. I had expected justice. I had expected to look the thing that made me in the eye and make it understand what it had created. I had not expected to find, underneath the ashes of everything I had come here to do, the faint ember glow of something that might, given time and patience and the same disciplined, deliberate care that I brought to everything, grow into a reason to stay. I reached up and pulled the pins from my hair, one by one, letting it fall. It was a small thing, but I had worn it up every day for 11 weeks. Every day of the performance. Every day of the costume. And now the performance was finished, and the costume was on the floor with the silver blade. And I was sitting in the empty chair in the great hall of Ironmoor Keep with the amber light fading slowly from my palm and my hair down, and 7 years of accumulated purpose finally, at long last, exhaled. Caspian watched me do it. He did not say anything. He did not need to. We sat in the dying candlelight until the fire burned to coals. We did not fill the silence with words it did not need. We let it be what it was. Two people at a table in the aftermath of something that had changed the shape of things, sitting with a changed shape, letting it settle. Outside, the mountain breathed its cold, indifferent breath. The pine forest stood in the dark, carrying its own long memory. And somewhere in the keep, a boy who smelled like river water and new pine was sleeping without the silver in his blood, because a woman who had every reason to burn this building to the ground had chosen instead to heal him. To matter here. Not as a weapon. Not as a ghost. Not as the echo of a 12-year-old girl standing in the tree-line with her family's fire in her lungs and her family's loss in her chest, and nothing left but the terrible, clarifying knowledge that she was still breathing. As herself. Seraphine Voss. Last of the Ashen. The girl the fire made. The maid who was always a queen. They would write about her for 100 years in the pack histories. In Ironmoor's records and Greymount's corrected accounts and the inter-pack tribunal documents that stripped 3 wolves of their standing and their safety and gave them, at last, to the justice that had been patient enough to wait. They would write about the amber light in the great hall. They would write about the silver blade that fell dull and useless to the stone floor. They would write about the containment case that a woman had emptied with her bare hands and a patience that had been building for 7 years. They would write about the empty chair. And the girl who finally sat in it. But what they would not be able to write, what the histories would gesture toward and the accounts would circle and the wolves who were present would spend the rest of their lives trying to describe accurately to people who had not been in that room, was the specific, unrepeatable quality of the moment when Seraphine Voss looked at the keep that had made her into something extraordinary by trying to destroy her, and chose it. Not from weakness. Not from forgetting. Not from the soft, convenient mercy of someone who has never truly been burned. From strength. From the full, clear-eyed, amber-lit knowledge of exactly what she was and exactly what she could do, and the sovereign, unassailable choice to do something more difficult than any of it. To remain. To rebuild. To take the ash that was all they had left her and make it, as the Ashen always made everything given to them in violence, into something that would outlast the violence entirely. She had come back to the pack that burned her house down. She had come back with 7 years of fire in her blood, and the names of the guilty in her memory, and a patience so deep and so complete that it had looked, to everyone who saw it, exactly like smallness. She had knelt on their floors. She had scrubbed their ash. She had learned every weakness in their walls. And when the moment came, she did not burn them. She did not need to. She had already won. She had won the moment she walked through the gate. She had won the moment she chose return over exile, reckoning over rage, presence over the clean and simple comfort of being only a ghost. The fire had tried to make her into nothing. Instead, it had made her into the only thing more powerful than a wolf who has never lost anything. It had made her into a woman who had lost everything. And come back anyway. And stayed.